thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us your role?
Sure, my name is Adam Duckett and I am the lead designer for Homefront The Revolution.
So tell us a little bit about Homefront The Revolution.
Okay, so in 2012 Crytek acquired the IP for the Homefront franchise, and so in doing so we gained creative control over the franchise and sort of looked at kind of what had been done previously on it and what we wanted to do with it. And one of the things we thought was in the vision for the gameplay was sort of bringing this guerrilla combat to the streets of Philadelphia, and that's our kind of high-level vision for the game. And the way to kind of express this through gameplay for us is to sort of create this kind of open, free-roam sandbox environment. So anyone familiar with Crytek games, the early Crysis games, the early Far Cry game, sort of going back to our heritage, going back to our roots, and creating these sort of open, engaging sandbox scenarios.
Okay. So how does the game actually work? How does it play? Tell us a little bit. Walk us through it.
Oh, that's an open question, isn't it?
How long have you got?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start from the start. Player plays as Ethan Brady, he's not military trained. That's very important for us. He's not sort of ex-marine who's come in with all this sort of highly trained skills. He's kind of your average sort of everyday guy. Could be a postman, could be a banker, and sort of finds himself in this kind of scenario where he's thrust into the middle of this kind of revolution, this uprising. And it's important for us to say that the player doesn't sort of he's not, like I say, he's not this one-man army. He's part of a larger resistance, and so he kind of utilises guerrilla tactics against an oppressive force, this kind of KPA force. So it's things like sabotaging their structures, infiltrating, assassinating key members, subterfuge, and it's kind of these hit-and-run tactics that allow the player to sort of strike against the KPA. And I'll touch on more about them in a bit, and then sort of melt back into the environment later on. So.
Okay, so the game was obviously set a few years after the first game.
Sure.
What's happened in that time?
Okay, so it was 2025, January 2025. The original sort of Homefront was set. The events in Homefront The Revolution take place 4 years later. So 2029, and basically what's happened in that time is the KPA, or the Korean People's Army, that's the main antagonist in the game, have sort of come in and they have full control of the United States. So it's a mature occupation is what we refer to it as, and so any kind of fight back against the KPA from the American civilians is dealt with early in the game. Is dealt with kind of a very sort of heavy brutality, this iron fist rule, this very sort of Orwellian sort of nature, this police state.
Okay. So is the game single player, co-op, multiplayer? How does it play best?
So the campaign is single player, that's what we're supporting, but we're also announcing 4-player co-op separate to the campaign.
Okay. So if I only had one other person to play with, how does that work? Or do I need 3 other players, or will computer play?
Up to 4.
Up to 4. Excellent. So if I just had one person to play with,
sure.
That's brilliant. And how's that going to work?
Well, we're not going into too many details about the co-op at the moment, so watch this space, and maybe we'll have a bit more in a short while for you.
Okay. What's been probably the biggest challenge for you guys in creating this game?
So I think, that's quite an interesting question, because this is the most sort of advanced and largest challenge I think that the studio has tackled. Sort of, we've obviously got the Gen 4 console, so that kind of allowed us to sort of stretch our legs a little bit. I mean, Crytek are always known for visuals and technology, and so we're trying to push that area. So, like I say, Gen 4, PC, Mac, and Linux is what we'll support, and getting that kind of large open world with sort of the visual fidelity that Crytek's known for has been like a large challenge in getting that up and running. But I mean, it's an ambitious project for us.
It looks very good, certainly. What sort of inspiration did you guys use for creating both the environment and also the story?
So obviously it's set in Philadelphia, so there's a lot of inspiration taken from Philadelphia itself, and then gameplay scenarios. We, as I mentioned earlier, we sort of reference back to the original Crysis and kind of Far Cry games, the sandbox shooter stuff. The story stuff I can't go into too much detail on. We're sort of we're writing that in-house at the moment.
So how big is the actual game in terms of, I don't mean in terms of hours, but I mean in terms of sort of location?
So we haven't got exact sort of measurements. I don't want to sit here and sort of say say some stuff, because those things always come back for some reason later to haunt you. Oh, someone's there with a tape measure measuring it. But we have multiple zones, and each one of those zones has its own distinct feel. So we have the yellow zones, which are the ones that, if you've seen the trailer, then that's the gameplay demo. That's kind of set inside a yellow zone, so it's quite dense in terms of content. And then you have the red zones that you transition through, kind of the resistance use tunnels to get around, so kind of underneath the KPA structures you'll transition into a red zone, and they're kind of more vast in sort of area, more sort of sprawling things, but still with a high density of content per meter.
So in terms of gameplay, is it more of a stealth game, an action game, or is it you can play however you want to play?
I mean, the last one is also, I mean, that's our DNA, right? We give the players sort of, right, here's your weapon set, here's your toolkit, it's a guerrilla toolkit, we call it, and I'll touch more on that later, but here's a set of tools, here's a scenario, you play how you want to play, and that's very much what we're trying to go for. We've sort of, because the player isn't military trained, and because the KPA force is so oppressive, what we're trying to sort of encourage is the use of thinking about a scenario and how you approach it. And so those kind of players that are used to sort of, the more standard military shooter where you sort of charge in all guns blazing, going to find themselves wanting to rely on those kind of guerrilla tactics a little bit more. So calling in your resistance support to help you out, maybe calling them in to create a distraction to draw people away, or sort of, like we saw in the video, using an RC car to navigate past certain objectives to hit them from within side. So it's these hit and run mechanics that I talked about earlier.
And can you tell us a little bit about the weapons and other technical bits in the game?
Sure. So we had there's a number of base weapons. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but each base weapon has a certain amount of modifications. So you go into it and you look at different scopes. It's pretty standard, different barrels, different underbarrel. What's different for Homefront The Revolution is you can actually take the top off your weapon. I think that's probably the best way to describe it, but you can take an M4 and you can sort of unclip the top, and then you can put an LMG attachment onto it. All of a sudden your assault rifle's an LMG, or maybe I'll tease a little bit here that we have you can take that off and you can put a drone, anti-drone weapon. So as the KPA use their drones against you and they bring in sort of their infantry, you're sort of shooting with an M4, drone reinforcements come in, you can take the top off, apply a different modification, and then go toe-to-toe with them there, rather than sort of carrying around this 15, 20 weapons on your backpack. It's all about how you modify and interact with those.
Sounds cool, can't wait.
Yeah.
So the original game had some seriously cool online features. Are you planning on using a lot of those, or are you just pretty much starting from scratch?
So again, I don't want to go too much into online. You're talking sort of, I don't want to imply what you're talking about, but the kind of the nature of the game we're designing sort of lends itself very well to the co-op aspect of things, and that's kind of what we're angling towards. So like I say, watch this space for a few more reveals on that later on in the development.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about the open world and how that's going to work.
Okay, so when the player starts out in the campaign, so when they start out sort of minute one, they'll see, as I mentioned earlier, there's this very sort of Orwellian police state. So the player will walk around and he'll see sort of these cameras tracking him, high drone presence, the KPA in full oppression. So the American civilians in full oppression by the KPA. So they're kind of downbeat, downtrodden, and as the player sort of gently chips away at this kind of stranglehold the KPA have on the American civilians, as he performs kind of sabotage opportunities, as he performs little bits of gameplay that can draw the player in, he'll get this thing called uprising points. And these uprising points, the more you collect, will sort of cause the American population to sort of rise up against their KPA oppressors. So once you reach a threshold, you'll see this dynamic, evolving open world, and you'll see this sort of change in the environment. So it's a visual change, but it's also kind of a way that the two kind of the KPA and the American people sort of interact with each other. And so, for an example, you could go out and sabotage a load of KPA infrastructure. And by doing so, you raise uprising, and by doing so, you cause the American population to sort of protest against, we don't want to live in this police state anymore. And that in turn causes the KPA to come out of facilities and lower their defences there, because they want to go and combat this. They want to put a stop to this protest. That allows the player to then sneak into that area. So it's in the player's best interest to sort of take all these opportunities, all these kind of scenarios, go and do little bits and pieces so they can gain access to new areas.
Are you guys planning on releasing a playable demo at any time?
Not releasing. I think I already dropped a spoiler earlier in the E3, so I don't mind iterating again, but we're aiming to have a playable demo by Gamescom. So it's hands-on, getting people used to the game, but that's what we're aiming for. So.
Okay. And what's the current release date at the moment?
So 2015 is what we're saying at the moment, no more specifics on that.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Why not subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the link on the screen now?